I just moved, so I don't have like a cool setup for this yet. So this is what we get. LED lighting has come a long way. I remember back when you didn't really want to use LED lighting because it just wasn't really good enough. Now I feel like majority of the sets I work on, there's aperture units there. 1200D lights are very common, 600Ds are common, Nova panels. I mean, I remember watching a behind the scenes video with the DP from Better Call Saul, talking about how in the final season they used a Nova panel for a lot of their stuff. So even on like higher budget, like bigger productions, like aperture's there. And with the introduction of their new lights, the CS15 and the XT26, I don't really see any sign of them slowing down. I mean, those two lights are awesome. I mean, you get a light that can do the full color spectrum at 1500 watts. That's brighter than the 1200D, does full color, and you can plug it into house power. And yeah, the XT26 is a 2600 watt light that requires a generator or one of their batteries, but it punches so much closer to an M40 at much less power, and it's bicolor. And both of these lights cost so much less than the M18 and the M40. I mean, the CS15 is $7,000 and the XT26 is $8,000. Okay, don't get me wrong, that's a lot of money, but when you compare it to the M18 and the M40. And you know, as new things come out, older things are going to become cheaper, they're going to become more accessible, and LED is so prominent. I wanted to kind of take a look and talk about the grandfather of lighting, tungsten units. Why would you want to use tungsten? When you point a digital camera at something and you record an image, you are taking that light, pulling it into the sensor, and turning it into ones and zeros. It's recreating the image digitally, and depending on what codec you're using to compress the footage, it's picking and choosing which of those ones and zeros it's going to keep and which ones it's going to throw out. Now, when you shoot on film, whether it's 16mm or 35, the light's hitting that film strip and it's causing a chemical process that burns that image onto the emulsion. There's no recreating the image, like you've captured the light. This is why I think film is such a sought after medium. You're burning light into that film strip, and the grain, the halation, the dense colors, all of those little things come with that chemical process. Now, the reason I mention this is because I kind of feel like it's the same thing with tungsten light. Tungsten is to lighting what film is for camera. When I worked in G&E, a lot of the smaller music videos and commercials I would work on were always using LED lighting. There was aperture units, light mats, all that type of stuff. But for some reason on the larger budgeted projects, we always use tungsten. There were a couple of Abercrombie fashion campaigns that I worked on where the majority of our keys were done with 10K and 5K tungsten units. Now the question here is, with all the money they had in their budget, why rent these large tungsten units and go through the trouble of having to power them and support them? You could just rent an M18 or an M40, or even rent like a bunch of 1200Ds and use that aperture bracket to put all the lights together and stack them. Well, I think it's because of the quality of the light. In the same way I mentioned about how like a digital sensor is recreating the image, I kind of feel like LED is recreating the light. LED is a bunch of little diodes of different colors mixing together to give you that light source. Where with a tungsten unit, when you turn it on, electricity is going into that thing, it's heating up a wire filament, and that thing is glowing red hot. It's like you've got a little fire in there, and oh boy, does that fire look good. There are two things that tungsten light does really well even to this day, and that is the quality of the light and the color rendition. If you think about it, like tungsten was the original light. The whole photochemical process was based around tungsten lights. They became the baseline for CRI, so they're perfectly color balanced. And also there's a bit more red in the color spectrum of tungsten lights, which helps with the red in skin tones. So that's why skin tones end up looking so rich under tungsten light. Now, admittedly, we do live in a time where I do think LEDs have become really good. They still aren't perfect, like they don't match tungsten exactly, but they're way better than they used to be. Back in the day, they had like terrible green shifts, the color was all over the place. I'd say they're pretty great now. I use LED on a lot of my projects. I own the Amaran light mats. I'm keying with one right now. They're great, but I mean, they're all still kind of expensive. And that's kind of the main reason I wanted to make this video. Tungsten's very cheap. That 10K that I mentioned earlier from the Abercrombie shoot, that's an $85 a day rental. Now, it's not really a fair comparison because you still have to spend a lot of money to actually be able to use that light. But if we're talking about smaller units, then you're good. There's a place called Wood Nickel here in LA that's like a budget rental house. And they have 2K tungsten units for 25 bucks a day, 1Ks for 16 bucks a day, 650s for $13 a day. I mean, most of the time, if you rent a grip and lighting package from a rental house, you're gonna have a lighting cart full of tungsten units that comes with that package. That usually ranges from like 300 watt lights to like 1Ks, but Those just come with the package. And even if you wanted to buy some tungsten units, I've seen 4Light ARRI kits sell for like a couple $100s on ShareGrid. Now there is a drawback to using tungsten units, of course, and that's like the power draw versus the output you get from them. Let's just compare like a 650 watt ARRI tungsten unit to an Aperture 600X set at 3200 Kelvin, because they both have like similar power draws. I'm not gonna like set up a whole test because I don't have those lights, but I'll reference the manufacturer's photometrics for it. An Aperture 600X set to 3200 Kelvin with the reflector is gonna have an output of 1426 lux at 5 meters. Now, a 650 watt tungsten from ARRI is gonna have about 430 lux at that same distance flooded. So you're getting like 3 times more output from the Aperture unit than the 650 at the same amount of power draw. If you wanted a similar output from a tungsten unit, you would need to use a 2K, where you'd probably get about 1300 lux at 5 meters. But now you're up to a power draw of 2000 watts. That means one light is gonna take up an entire circuit in your house if you can handle it. Whereas otherwise you could plug in like 3 600Xs. Now it sounds like I'm making a great case against tungsten right now. Why would I want to use these when I get way more bang for my buck out of an LED light? But I think it's kind of down to the application you use it for. You know, tungsten units aren't really going to be feasible for recreating daylight unless you have all the money and the power to like use those big units. But let's say you're just filming a night scene. This is where I think tungsten becomes a really good budget choice for lighting. I think there's a lot you can do with just a couple low watt units at nighttime, and I'm gonna go ahead and show you some examples of things I've shot with a couple tungsten units and maybe pull some references from other projects. So yeah, those are some shots with tungsten units. I guess a final list of like pros and cons are: pros, the quality of light, the color rendition, affordability and accessibility. The cons, they get really hot, they draw a lot of power. You're gonna need a lot more grippery to shape the light depending on what your application is. And that can be really annoying, having like a forest of grip gear somewhere. It just takes up a lot of space. Anyway, that's just my thoughts on tungsten units. If you're gonna go use some, cool. Get some gloves, don't burn yourself. Bye.